Hello everyone, GKYN here. Have you ever seen an LED beam so tight it almost looks like a laser? Well, over the last 3 days I tried to build exactly that. It started as a simple question: how absurd of a beam can I get from a cheap high power LED if I completely ignore practicality and focus entirely on making the beam tighter and more controlled? And somehow it escalated into this. Now, before anyone says anything, yes, I know this thing looks insane. Looks some kind of like sci-fi sniper rifle or experimental beam cannon. But every weird design choice here actually has a practical engineering reason behind it. The giant lenses serve for beam collimation. The long tube actually helps stop unwanted light from spreading everywhere and keeps the beam more controlled. The exposed electronics are there for cooling, accessibility, and easy reconfiguration. And the fan exists because high power LEDs get hot extremely fast. Basically, this whole thing exists because LEDs are terrible at pretending to be lasers. Now, how does it work, you may ask? Well, firstly, we have the LED diode itself. It's a cheap, high power LED diode powered by 3.3 volts. The build uses 8 AAA batteries to power everything, and the LED diode uses a buck converter to get 3.3 volts. The LED diode is cooled by a small fan that is connected straight to the batteries and the heatsink. There's of course a button, but the most interesting part in my opinion is the optics. Firstly, connected straight to the LED, there's a circular metallic disc reflector which basically sends back any lost light, and the walls of the tube are covered with gold foil to reflect back the light and shape the beam. Shortly after that, there's a small lens which is basically a magnifying glass, and a plastic watch cover that seems to help collimation. After those, there's a large aluminum foil covered pipe where it collects and sends back any lost light, and eventually leads to another magnifying glass that collimates the beam more. Finally, we have a magnifying glass lens at the very end that is the exact same as the one before it. The electronics are housed in a small T-box and the LED is housed inside the pipe. So here's the problem. Normal flashlights spread light everywhere. That's useful for lighting up a room or seeing nearby objects. But I wanted the opposite. I wanted a beam that stayed tight over long distances without spreading too much. And that turns out to be surprisingly difficult with LEDs. The reason is that LEDs have a relatively large emitting surface. Lasers are tiny point-like light sources with extremely low beam divergence. LEDs are not. So if you want an LED beam to stay tight over long distances, you need to fight physics using optics. A lot of optics. So I started out with a pretty basic setup. Just the LED, some power electronics, and a simple optical system. At first the beam was terrible. It was bright, but it spread way too much. So naturally, instead of stopping like a reasonable person, I made the optics bigger, then even bigger. At some point, this thing stopped becoming a flashlight and started becoming an optical instrument. The entire structure eventually became 117 centimeters long. I even had to scrap some part of it because it just was way too big. The light at the end was way too weak. So in the end ended up being like 80 centimeters long, which is honestly kind of ridiculous, but there was a reason for it. The bigger optics helped keep the beam tighter, and the long tube helped reduce the stray light and keep the beam more controlled. And surprisingly, it actually worked. The beam became dramatically tighter than a normal flashlight beam. Now, the electronic side of this project was also complete chaos. I used a high-power LED, cooling fans, boost circuitry, custom wiring, battery packs, and a very questionable amount of improvisation. And yes, I intentionally left most of the electronics exposed. Partly for cooling, partly because I needed easy access to the batteries, and partly because this thing was evolving so fast that fully enclosing everything would have made experimentation annoying. This smaller version was actually one of the earlier stages before I added the massive optical system. And honestly, it's probably way more practical. The giant optics improved the beam dramatically, but they also made the entire device enormous and awkward to handle. At this point, the build basically became, what if I brute force LED physics into behaving more like a laser? Now, there's actually something invented exactly for this apparently. It's a technology called LEP. An LEP is basically a blue laser shooting onto a layer of phosphor, a material LEDs use to turn the blue laser light into scattered white light, the same as in LEDs, just in a microscopic, insanely strong point, which allows you to collimate the light insanely well, and it looks just like a laser. Now, perhaps next time I'll try an LEP for version 2. Anyways, time for a few experiments. Firstly, I tried to use it in a pitch black room. This is how it turned out. Pretty strong, yeah. And then I tried to see how it looked lighting up a star ruby. But that was pretty sharp of a star. Then I tried shining it on labradorite. And then I compared the beams of it and a normal flashlight. And a laser. So yeah, over the course of 3 days I accidentally built a giant experimental beam cannon. And here's the nighttime footage I know you probably want. Now, I know you probably can't see it, but I did manage to light up that tree from afar. My phone camera just didn't catch it, sorry for that. Now, honestly, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. This is a pretty fun build. See you next time.